The South African Human Rights Commissioner Philile Ntuli joins us now for more on that report. Commissioner, good evening. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. It's been a couple of hours since your 252-page report has been out there. Some analysts have been looking at it, and some journalists have been reporting on the July unrest, have been looking at it. I'm sure you've seen some of the reaction already. But the most critical one so far I've seen says 2 years on, 50 billion or 30 billion would have knocked off the economy. 350 or so people would have died. The report of the South African Human Rights Commission says a lot, but says nothing.
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to your viewers. Thank you very much for inviting us. We do take note of the responses of South Africans in general, those that are positive and those that are critical. We also note that even those that are critical are constructively critical, and we appreciate all the feedback to our report. What we can assure South Africans is that our report has been thoroughly investigated, meticulously considered, with the interest of South Africans at the center of the work that we have done, and the mandate of the Commission as the driving force behind the work that we have produced.
I suppose maybe for a layperson, because of the many, what would you say, clips that would have been out there, videos, tweets, and so on and so forth, they are saying, well, the proof was out there. Why was it so difficult for the Commission to put two and two together out of those proofs that are out there? I suppose the burden of proof in legal terms, maybe it's a little bit higher than what a layman would think it is.
The investigation that we have conducted, Thabo, sought to ask four main questions, driven and guided by the mandate of the Commission, but also the powers of the Commission. And with regards to this investigation, with regards to Section 13 of the South African Human Rights Act, which gives us the powers to conduct investigations of the nature such as the hearing to the July unrest. The four questions that we have asked, and I will read them for the benefit of yourself and the viewers. The first one being the social, economic, spatial, and political factors prevalent in the various affected areas, and the extent to which these would have played a role in the unrest. The second being the causes of the alleged racially motivated attacks and the killings in the country. And the third being the causes of the apparent lapses in the law enforcement by state security agencies, particularly in the South African Police Service, and the role of private security companies in the unrest. And the last one, of course, being the causes of the July unrest, with particular focus on Gauteng as well as KwaZulu-Natal. I do note in the insert, in the introduction to this introduction, that you would have made reference also to Commissioner Masemola, who spoke to some of the work that the South African Police Service would have begun to do in responding not only to the findings of the Commission, but the ongoing engagements that we have been having with various institutions of state. And what this shows is that the production and the presentation of this report to South Africans does not indicate that the Commission has not been in constant and continuous engagement with especially organs of state on the issues that would have arisen out of the events of the July unrest. So
let's start with that first question then. So you are saying to us, as per your investigation, you would have found that there were socio-economic conditions that allowed for the unrest to happen. There was a lot of inequality. There were frustrations, for example, around the lockdown at the time. You are able at least to link that piece of information to the unrest. And you do mention that, of course, for the first time, a state president was arrested. That could have been a contributing factor. But you're saying conclusively that it's not, I suppose, the sole reason why this would have happened.
Yes, absolutely, Cabo. We look at the events of the unrest within their context, and the context within which these events occurred, as you have clearly pointed out. We were in the middle of level 4 alert of the COVID pandemic, which was a global pandemic and challenge for all of us. South Africa was facing an economic crisis. We were facing the highest recorded levels of unemployment as a country. And the IMF, prior to the advent of the pandemic, had indicated that South Africa had some of the highest income inequalities globally. So this is the context within which the unrest occurred. Yeah. What we found in the course of our investigation was that there were two types of actors or instigators. There were the primary instigators, and then there were the secondary instigators. The primary instigators are those who have orchestrated the unrest. They are very well resourced, and they were able, in their planning, to be able to meticulously bomb ATMs, to be able to attack the communication networks, very sophisticated communication networks of the state. And in their attacks, they were then able to mobilize the secondary actors who we saw, particularly in media reports, and those were the masses who were responsible for the mass thefts that some have labeled as the looting in malls in particular. Yeah.
Explain for us, sorry, Commissioner, I want to come in there before you move on. The primary actors, you're saying they were well-resourced. Explain for us what you mean by well-resourced. Are you saying well-resourced in monetary terms? Or what exactly were they well-resourced in?
When we speak about well-resourced, we mean in the acts that occurred during the unrest were quite obviously well-resourced. There was a calculated destruction of factories, for example, and warehouses. There was an organized disconnection of security and fire alarm systems, particularly in large industries. And then, of course, the attacks on government communication facilities in the Durban port, which is one of the very critical government ports. There were also the bombings and removals of ATMs in strategic areas and in malls as well. And all of these events, even though they occurred in various locales, they together cannot be viewed as mutually distinct. Yeah. And in our analysis, we have then concluded that these are the results of the actions of the primary actors who are the main instigators of this July unrest.
So you're saying your investigation then was, in a sense, limited because that kind of information is the information that we already have publicly to say, well, there are people who were planning this very well. They could have been planning this for a very long time. But it doesn't go further to say to you who they are.
The level of understanding of the public with regards to the sophistication of the primary actors varies. The aim of the report does various things. The one, of course, is to conduct the investigation, which is a form of research, but it also serves to archive, but it also serves to then be able to produce this information for the state security agencies, particularly the NPA and the other security sectors, to be able to act in investigating further these primary actors. Yeah.
So you're saying, for example, a financial forensic would not have been something that the South African Human Rights Commission would have been able to do, because I'm sure there were airtimes bought, there were buses hired, taxis and so on and so forth. You speak of a network, there was broad communication that would have been taking place. A forensic investigation of that nature is outside of the purview of the South African Human Rights Commission to be able to then link these individuals to these acts.
Absolutely. As a Chapter 9 institution, our mandate is very clear. Mainly ours is to focus on human rights, particularly the promotion of human rights, the protection of human rights, and the observance or the monitoring of the observance of human rights. And that information we can then use in engagement and in consultation through a process we call a constitutional dialogue, not only with the national executive, but also with the legislation at both national and provincial levels, but also with the courts in bringing about matters that we have investigators to then institute processes of legal action. These investigations are able to assist us in the collation of that data and to be able to bring about well-researched and well-investigated cases before the South African courts.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you see, for example, as the South African Human Rights Commission tweets and videos and WhatsApp messages that would have said, free Zuma and so on, will ban another mall and so on and so forth and so forth. How are you dealing with that kind of evidence? How are you then saying, well, this could be the evidence that is there, but it is not the only reason that would have caused somebody to go burn a mall?
That's a very, very important point to raise, Thabo. And in response, perhaps let me mention that the hearing itself is constituted within the particular framework whereby we issued as a South African Human Rights Commission a call for submissions from the public, from those who had information that they would have wanted to share with the Commission in line with the 4 questions, which were the terms of reference for the hearing panel as well as the investigators that were duly appointed to conduct this hearing. That is most important. So the evidence that we have assessed is the evidence that would have been submitted to the Commission within the auspices of the call for submissions from the public. Secondly, with regards to the public information, we are living in an age of what is known as the 4th Industrial Revolution, and while it comes with a lot of positive advances, it also comes with a lot of challenges and cautions, and some of these cautions refer to what is colloquially known as fake news. And as the South African Human Rights Commission, we are very cautious in the information that we regard as credible and the information that we regard as not credible. There is a variety of information that was shared during and around the period of the July unrest, particularly on social media. But in the age of misinformation and disinformation, it becomes the responsibility of an institution like ours that is established to protect and advance constitutional democracy to be very discerning in the kind of information, but also in the manner through which we collect our information, which is why it was very, very important to protect the process through the auspices of the framework of the call for submissions.
Yeah. So you would then, in that instance, one would ask, is there a huge chunk of that information that you would have maybe put to the side or disallowed for lack of legitimacy?
We did not disallow any information that would have been submitted to us under the auspices of the July unrest. So all of the information that would have been submitted to the Commission in lieu of the July unrest hearing would have been considered and assessed by the Commission.
And let's talk then about the other layer of what you're saying, the degree of inaction and on the side of the security apparatus. Was it pure inaptitude? Was it pure incapacity? Or were there political machinations that were happening where somebody would have seen something but just chose not to react?
Thabo, inaptitude was part of the factor. A lack of capacity was part of the factor. But what was very clear to us as the South African Human Rights Commission is that the South African Police Service is highly undercapacitated to deal with the level of unrest that you would have seen occurring in the July unrest or during July 2021. And as a result, we saw then the reliance particularly by many communities and the private security sector, in order to protect themselves, and some, even in the absence of such, would have then taken to the streets themselves to protect themselves. While issues of political relations within the security sector itself could have played a part, but it was a varying and multiple levels of factors that would have contributed to the lapse and the challenges that the South African Police Service in particular would have had in responding to the events of the July unrest.
Yeah. One of the things that I remember quite clearly would have been presented to the Commission is the fact that the then police commissioner was nowhere to be found as far as the minister was concerned, trying to get hold of him. What clarity and what understanding did you take out of that as to what was actually happening and why that would have been the case?
The evidence presented to us at the time, we called both the Minister of Police but also the former National Commissioner of Police, and it became quite clear, not only during the July unrest, but I think it was quite clear to the public even prior to the July unrest hearing, that there were some challenges in the working relationship between the Minister and the former National Commissioner General Philile. And those breakdowns in communication and relationship had an effect in the ways in which communication was shared, which of course would have also had an impact in the ability of that institution to be responsive in an effective and efficient manner.
Yeah. The other highlighted issue, of course, is the question of Phoenix and the lives that would have been lost there, the role that security forces would have played. Others would have watched things happen and not acted. Others would have been a part of the ruckus that was going on. What is the clarity there?
When we assess the July unrest, there are, as you say, there are multiple layers of complexity with regards to the events that would have occurred. So while on the one hand you have the actions of the primary actors who mainly focused on the economic destruction in especially malls and in big industries, you then also had what then occurred mainly in residential areas that then transpired into this racial violence, particularly in Phoenix, surrounding areas, Pietermaritzburg, and other parts of KwaZulu-Natal. The South African Human Rights Commission had to consider that there were those who were directly involved in perpetrating the violence. And as you correctly point out, Thabo, there were then those who watched the violence take place. And what do we say about those who watch the violence take place, but they do not intervene even when they see that this violence is racial? Our assessment and our analysis is that the challenges, particularly in relation to the relationships between those of Indian descent and those of African descent in KwaZulu-Natal, is one that is marked by a historically contextual tension. And that tension was quite clear in the evidence that was brought between us, as many of the witnesses who appeared before the hearing panel made reference to, for example, Katomena in 1949 and the occurrences therein, which refer to violence between these two communities. And similarly, again, the violence that would have occurred between these two communities in Inanda in 1985. What we as the South African Human Rights Commission found quite peculiar is that there is an exact number of years between 1949 and 1985, as well as 85 to 2021. There is exactly 36 years between these occurrences. And our concern is that if we as the South African society do not take a focused attention to these issues in the next 36 years from 2021, we then might see a similar eruption of racial tension between these two communities.
Commissioner, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on and for that intervention tonight. South African Human Rights Commissioner Philile Ntuli, following the release of their report into the July unrest back in 2021.